Hi, I'm Jacob. I'm a PhD student in criminology here at Penn. And this is my paper, More Cops, Fewer Prisoners, that I wrote with Dr. Aaron Chalfin, where we look at if you increase the number of police officers, does that have an effect on people being sent to prison? And the reason we did this study is because in the last 30 years or so, there's been a huge growth in the number of people in prison. This graph shows the percent of adults in America who are currently incarcerated. So on the x-axis, you go from the year 1978 till 2016. And on the y-axis, it's the percent of adults. And starting in 1978, you have about 0.2% of all adults are incarcerated. And since then, it's gone up to about 0.7% at its height in the early 2000s, since decreasing to about 0.6% in 2016. And in real numbers, that's an increase from about 300,000 people to about 1.5 million people. So that's led to a lot of discussions on if we incarcerate too many people and if that is a major issue. And alongside this increase you see here, there's also been an increase, though much slower, of the number of police officers employed. And that too has led to some discussions on if this increase in the number of officers employed is related to this increase you see here. So there's really two stories in this conversation. The first is that yes, police increase incarceration, and that's mostly through the story of police arrest people. Some of the people who get arrested end up in prison. Therefore, if we just increase the number of police, we also increase the number of people sent to prison. It's a pretty simple story. The second story comes mostly from the former NYPD Commissioner Bill Bratton. He's saying that police may in fact drive incarceration rates down. And his argument is that police could prevent enough crimes that we reduce the amount of arrest and reduce the number of people sent to prison. So if you believe the first story that police increase incarceration, you may think that police affect crime through incapacitation. So imagine a person goes and he robs a bank, and then he gets arrested and sent to prison for some period of time. While he's in prison, he can't commit more crimes, so crime would go down, but through this mechanism, incarceration rates would go up. There's two downsides to this. The first is that it's very financially costly to keep people in prison. And the second is what we in criminology call collateral consequences, which are negative effects to inmates' family, friends, and community as a result of them being in prison rather than being home. So the second way police could affect crime is through deterrence. So imagine the first person is going to rob the bank, and he sees this police car parked outside, and he decides it's too risky, and he decides not to rob the bank. So crime would go down, and as a result, fewer people would be sent to prison. And this is really beneficial because it's fairly cheap. You don't have the cost of keeping the person in prison, and you also don't have the cost of the crime, so the effect on society and the victim specifically. And it was our own Ben Franklin who said, "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." So there's been several studies on whether police affect crime, and most of the studies find that about a 10% increase in the number of police officers employed is related to about a 4 to 10% decrease in violent crime, and about half that size effect in property crime. But so far, people haven't looked at if police affect incarceration. So that's exactly what we're looking at here. We're seeing what happens to state prison admissions when we spend more money on police officers. And to give you a preview of our findings, we find little evidence that police increase incarceration, and it's in fact suggestive that it says that police are very unlikely to be a driver of that mass incarceration you see in the first graph. So do these results make sense? Well, if you watch a lot of shows like Law and Order, you might think no. It seems like every episode they arrest a bad guy and send him to prison for a very long time. But that's actually not true. In fact, police make relatively few arrests per officer. Here I have a single year of real data showing the total number of officers employed in the country at a little under 800,000, as well as the number of arrests, which are 11 million made in a single year in the country, and then the number of people sent to prison, which is a little under 600,000 people. So in the right column, I'm just dividing the number of arrests and prison admissions by the number of officers, so we could get a number of arrests and admissions per officer per year. So you could see that in any year, an officer is making only about 14 arrests, or about one every month. So you may think if they're making 14 arrests, they're also leading to 14 people being sent to prison, but that's not true. Only about 1 in every 20 arrests lead to a prison spell. And the reason for this is that even if you get arrested for a serious crime, which most arrests are for more minor crimes that are never leading to prison in the first place, even for the serious crimes, relatively few people arrested will end up in prison. Here I have real data, and we're going to be looking at a hypothetical example of 100 people arrested for murder and rape. And you could see that of those 100, only about 80 of them are going to be convicted in court, and only about 3/4 of that initial 100 are going to be sent to prison. So there's a substantial decline as it goes through the court system of the number of people from arrest to prison. And for the more common crime of rape, that's even more stark. Only half of people arrested and charged with rape are going to be convicted, and only 1/3 of these are going to be sent to prison. So what we do in the study is we're looking at data from 41 states across almost 20 years. We're going to be getting prisoner data, which is the number of people admitted to prison in each state for each year from the Bureau of Justice Statistics. And then the way that we're going to be measuring police spending comes from a survey from the United States Census, which asks local jurisdictions how much you spend on a bunch of areas, such as police officers. We're also going to be throwing in a bunch of control variables to control for differences in demographics and economics, as well as political throughout the states. And these are pretty common variables in criminology. So our conclusion when we run the analysis is that 1 additional police officer is related to about 0.1 fewer admissions. And this is not a statistically significant result, so we can't say that this is an effect that is truly different from no effect at all, or we can't say for sure that police have any effect on admissions. So to reiterate, we find little evidence that police increase incarceration, and that suggests that police are very unlikely to have been a driver of mass incarceration. Thank you.